November 1974. Studio One, NBC, Burbank. The desk lamp caught the edge of Johnny Carson's profile as he shuffled his monologue cards between commercial breaks. The studio audience murmured in that particular frequency of anticipation. 20 million more watched from living rooms across 4 time zones. The red tally light on camera 2 blinked twice. 30 seconds. Dean Martin was already in the wings, and no one had told Johnny he was there. The Tonight Show had become, by the mid-1970s, something more consequential than entertainment. It was the last campfire of a fracturing nation. Vietnam had ended badly. Watergate had gutted institutional trust. The economy was collapsing under the weight of inflation no one understood. But every weeknight at 11:30, Johnny Carson sat behind that desk in Burbank and performed the singular alchemy of American television. He made the country feel like it still knew itself. His power was not loud, it was structural. A single joke could end a political career. A single invitation could resurrect one. Publicists understood this. Network executives understood this. Johnny Carson understood it so completely he rarely acknowledged it aloud. Dean Martin had been a fixture of that same cultural landscape for 2 decades. Rat Pack elegance, effortless charm. The man who made drinking look like philosophy and singing look like breathing. His variety show had ruled NBC's Thursday nights through the late 60s, a glittering hour of tuxedos and timing that felt imported from a more confident America. But by 1974, Dean's show had been canceled. His son, Dean Paul Martin, a pilot in the California Air National Guard, had died in a crash that March, though the details were kept quiet, almost aggressively private, in the way grief was managed before the confessional age of television. Dean had not been seen much. When he appeared at all, it was in Las Vegas, where the lights were kinder and the audiences asked fewer questions. Johnny had not expected him tonight. The stage manager held up 5 fingers. Doc Severinsen's band rolled into the bumper music, that bright brass sound that meant America could relax for 6 more minutes before the news came back on. Johnny straightened his tie, that small automatic gesture of a man who had performed this exact sequence 4,000 times. And then Dean Martin stepped onto the stage without being announced. No introduction, no cue. He simply walked out from behind the curtain, hands in his pockets, that lopsided grin in place, and the audience erupted. Not the polite applause of a scheduled guest, the roar of recognition, of relief, of a country glad to see a man it had worried about. Johnny stood. This was unusual. He almost never stood for guests mid-show unless the moment required it, and even then the decision was calculated. But he stood, and he met Dean at the edge of the guest chair, and they shook hands in that old-fashioned way men did before embraces became permissible on television. The audience kept clapping. Dean waved them quiet with one hand, that familiar gesture that said, "You're too kind, but let's get on with it." He sat. Johnny sat. The desk between them suddenly looked like what it was, a prop. "Didn't know you were coming by," Johnny said, his voice carrying that mix of warmth and control he could dial up or down depending on what the moment required. "Neither did I," Dean said, and the audience laughed, because Dean Martin could make "neither did I" sound like the setup to a joke even when it wasn't. They talked. It was easy. It was what both men did better than almost anyone alive. Dean told a story about Frank Sinatra forgetting lyrics in Miami. Johnny told one about a parrot in Omaha. The rhythm was familiar, the kind of conversation that looked spontaneous but ran on the rails of decades of professional timing. The audience relaxed. The producers in the booth exhaled. This was going to be fine. And then, during the second commercial break, Dean leaned in. The microphone was off. The cameras were off. The studio audience was distracted by the warm-up comedian trying to keep energy high during the dead air. Johnny was glancing at his notes for the next segment, something about a muckluck shortage in Alaska, a callback bit from Tuesday. Dean's voice was low, almost conversational, but it carried the weight of something unplanned. "I don't know how much longer I can do this." 6 words, delivered without drama, almost without affect, the same tone Dean might have used to order a drink or comment on the weather, but Johnny heard the pronoun, I. Not we, not the business, I. and Johnny Carson, who had built an entire career on reading subtext, on knowing when a guest was performing and when they had stopped, understood immediately that Dean was not talking about the segment. He was talking about the rest of it, the smiling, the showing up, the pretending that standing under studio lights and telling jokes was still something his body wanted to do.
Johnny did not respond, not audibly, but his posture changed. The cards went down, the easy posture, the one that said, "We're just two guys killing time before America goes to bed," disappeared. He looked at Dean the way you look at someone when the performance is ended, and what remains is just two men sitting in chairs under lights that suddenly feel too bright. The stage manager counted down from 5, the red light blinked on, and Johnny Carson did something he almost never did. He stopped the show. Not literally. The cameras kept rolling. The audience did not realize anything had shifted, but Johnny abandoned the rundown. He waved off the mucklux bit. He leaned back in his chair and asked Dean Martin a question that was not on any producer's sheet, was not part of any segment plan, was not designed to get a laugh or tee up a story. He asked him what it felt like to lose someone. Dean did not deflect. He did not joke. For maybe 90 seconds, an eternity in live television, he spoke about his son. Not in detail, not maudlin. He spoke the way men of that generation spoke about grief. Plainly, briefly, with the assumption that elaboration would be indulgent. He said his boy had loved flying. He said it happened fast. He said some things you do not get over, you just get used to carrying them. And Johnny Carson, who had lost his own son in a car accident in 1991, though that was still years away, still unimaginable, nodded. He did not interrupt. He did not pivot to comfort. He let the silence sit. The audience did not know what to do. There was no applause cue, no laughter, just two men talking about something true and 20 million people watching from rooms where the only light was the blue glow of the television, suddenly aware they were witnessing something unscripted. The desk had always been Johnny's symbol of control. Solid oak, carefully positioned so every camera angle made him look centered, authoritative, at ease. It was the one constant in 30 years of broadcasting. Guests came and went, band leaders changed, set designers repainted, but the desk remained, and behind it Johnny remained. And America understood that as long as he was there, the night could be managed. But in that moment, the desk was irrelevant. It separated nothing. It protected no one. When the segment ended, Johnny did not do the usual pivot to Ed McMahon for a laugh or tease the next guest. He simply said, "Dean Martin, ladies and gentlemen," and the applause came, but it was different, respectful, almost cautious. Dean stood, shook Johnny's hand again, and walked off stage the same way he had entered, hands in pockets, grin back in place, the performance restored. But the producers knew, the band leader knew, and Johnny knew that what had just happened would not be repeated, could not be scheduled, and would probably never be referenced again. Television, by its nature, is about surfaces. It is lights and makeup and timing, and the illusion that the people on screen are both like you and better than you. The great performers understood this bargain. They gave you access, but only to the parts they had decided you could see. Johnny Carson was a master of this. He could sit across from presidents, astronauts, comedians, actresses, activists, and make each one feel like the most interesting person in the room, while revealing almost nothing about himself. He was warm but distant, generous but withholding. He let you think you knew him, and you never did. But Dean Martin, in November 1974, broke the frame, not by demanding confessional intimacy, not by crying or raging or making a scene, by simply saying out loud to the one person on television who might understand that the act was getting harder, that the showing up required more than it used to, that the machinery of fame and performance and charm, which had once run effortlessly, now required conscious effort, and he was not sure how much he had left. Johnny honored it the only way he could. He stopped performing. For 90 seconds, The Tonight Show was not a show. It was a conversation between two men who had spent their entire adult lives being watched and who understood, without needing to explain it, what that cost. The audience did not understand the full weight of what they were seeing. They could not, but they felt it. In the letters that came into NBC over the next week, viewers wrote about that segment, not because it was funny, not because it was dramatic, because it was real. And real on television was so rare that when it appeared, people noticed. The desk lamp stayed on long after Dean left. Johnny finished the show. He did the Carson character, the monologue callback, the Ed banter, and the perfectly timed goodnight. But when the cameras went dark and the audience filed out and the stagehands began breaking down the set, Johnny stayed at the desk. He did not leave immediately, the way he usually did. He sat under the stage lights that were now dimming, and he did not move. The stage manager asked if he needed anything. Johnny shook his head, and for a few minutes in an empty studio in Burbank.
The Tonight Show ran for another 18 years under Johnny Carson. He interviewed 10,000 guests. He delivered 15,000 monologues. He became the most trusted man in America, not because he told people what to think, but because he created a space every night where the chaos of the day could be metabolized into something manageable, a joke, a story, a conversation that felt, for a moment, like it mattered. And sometimes it did. The desk was donated to the Smithsonian when Johnny retired in 1992. It sits now in a climate-controlled archive, behind glass, a relic of an era when television was the center of American life. Visitors walk past it without much ceremony. It is smaller than it looked on screen. Most props are. But for 30 years, it was the place where America came to feel less alone. And on one night in November 1974, it was the place where two men, both grieving in ways they would never fully explain, stopped pretending that the performance was enough. Dean Martin's words, "I don't know how much longer I can do this," were never recorded. No transcript exists. No one in the booth heard them. But Johnny Carson heard them, and he responded the only way that mattered, by making space for the truth, even when the truth had no punchline. That is what made him irreplaceable. Not the jokes, not the timing, the willingness, when it was necessary, to let the show stop being a show.